Good morning. Good morning to members of the media and all of the members of our viewing audience online. I want to thank you for taking the opportunity to join us at the Opposition Sunday morning press conference. My name is Anita Haynes. I'm the Member of Parliament for Tabaquite, and I am joined by Dr. Tim Gopeesingh, former Minister of Education, practicing medical doctor, who will be leading the charge today in a discussion on our health sector and the government's continued failure to effectively manage the health sector. Dr. Gopeesingh.
Thank you very much, Member of Parliament Anita Haynes. Good morning to all my colleagues, members of the media, and listening and viewing audience of the various internet channels. I will speak this morning on some of the critical and crucial health matters affecting the lives of our dear 1.4 million citizens of Trinidad and Tobago, and the ongoing neglect of the public health sector by this Prime Minister Rowley's administration, which is continuing to deleteriously affect our citizens' health, well-being, with consequential loss of lives, many of which are preventable. On Tuesday, the 23rd of this week, 23rd of August, on a political platform, the Prime Minister announced his intention to give a special payment to health workers out of the incoming 22-23 budget for the health sector workers' service during the COVID-19 pandemic. Interestingly, his comments came on the heels of his own health minister's announcement that the COVID-19 infection rates, hospitalization rates, and sadly, death rates are once more on the rise in Trinidad and Tobago. Now, what is notable is that Prime Minister Rowley's announcement was, as is considered nationally, clearly a political gimmickry. After all, we are going into local government elections in the next few months. By the next day, the health minister was saying that he was in the dark about this payment statement and would need to get more information from the finance minister. So clearly, this was conceived by the Prime Minister, did not consult anyone, and we know that this decision that the statement that he made will not be fulfilled. This statement came, or the announcement came on the heels of the massive protests by the entire labor movement and their rejection of the government's, what they considered to be a paltry offer of 4% in wage increases, and the fact that they have been lobbying for proper increases and benefits over the past 7 years and now to the 8th year since Rowley's government took office in 2015. In fact, we can't really say that there has been any negotiation concluded by this government for the last 7 years, whereas in Prime Minister Prasad Bises's government, the PP government, we had concluded over 135 to 140 wage negotiations, some of which we inherited from the Manning's administration. Many we inherited from the Manning's administration. So what this shows is that once more, Prime Minister Rowley is attempting to use the COVID-19 pandemic for cheap, ineffective electioneering in the hope of using it as a plaster and cosmetic patch or a patch-up for their major policy failures. And the inability of the health minister to effectively deliver proper health care to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. This continuing pervasive criminal negligence resulting in deaths of hundreds of our citizens must not be accepted. The people have to speak out. Mothers, fathers, families who go into the hospitals and do not receive the health care which they are constitutionally enshrined in to receive. They have to speak out and not be quiet about the type of healthcare that they are receiving And we know I've been bombarded on many occasions to see if I can give help to a family X or family Y who are in emergency department of hospital in Port of Spain or San Fernando or Eric Williams. And they're sitting on benches and they're in trolleys and they can't get a bed for 72 hours. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. So I therefore wish to highlight some of the key issues this morning surrounding this reality, so that the public and the population will see through this clear attempt by the Prime Minister Rowley's government to gaslight them, and we demand better. The population demands better. We must not allow this criminal negligence to continue. The Prime Minister Rowley's government deliberately failed to honor their constitutionally enshrined responsibility to provide high quality, equitable, cost effective healthcare to all the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. Thus far, from COVID, over 4,100 lives have been lost. I think the last one I saw about 2 days ago, 4,113 lives have been lost from COVID. At one time, we were the highest infection rates and deaths per million population globally in the world, and certainly in the Caribbean and in the Western Hemisphere. Many other people have been infected in various ways from COVID-19, and most of these negative effects on the population could have been avoided if the Rowley government had implemented proper policies in this healthcare delivery and proper management, and yet still to implement the Simongal report. All these were stated in the Simongal report, and that was laid in Parliament on February 24th. I believe it's almost 6 months now that this Simongal report has been laid in Parliament, and we can't hear a quiver from the government on what measures they have taken to implement any of the 18 recommendations, and I will go into this a little more. So it's sitting there. It was only after Leader of the Opposition, Mrs. Prasad Bissessa, and myself, and many others, pressed the government from since July of 2020 that they should have a commission of inquiry. We want a commission of inquiry into the management of this COVID-19 pandemic and the 4,000 deaths that were occurring. And Prime Minister Rowley didn't do anything about it until the pressure became so huge from the population, when families were losing their loved ones and they were unable to determine what was happening, when they died, where they died, sometimes 3 weeks later. You all will remember that, members of the listening audience. And it was only the pressure from Mrs. Prasad Bissessa's Leader of the Opposition, then Rowley, wilted and decided to have a commission of inquiry. He first gave them a week to finish, to do the work. You could imagine 1 week to do analysis of nearly 4,000 deaths. Then he wilted and said that he will give them 3 weeks. But at the end of 3 weeks, the guys worked very hard because they are true professionals. They produced the Simongal report with 18 recommendations. And to date, Prime Minister Rowley and Minister Diyal Singh, can you tell this country which one of those recommendations have you implemented? And show the country what you have implemented. You're continuing to have loss of lives on a daily basis. In fact, I believe in June of this year, we had 100 deaths from the COVID. It is continuing, and we're on the cusp of another pandemic. So you continue to fail this country. Only old talk, no implementation of anything, and criminal negligence is pervasive in the health sector in this country. I tell the population, I say to the population, we must not sit back and accept this. It is time for everyone to speak out. Your families have died. Families are still being infected. In fact, over 170,000 citizens of Trinidad and Tobago have been affected by COVID, and many of whom have long COVID complications, which are so many. You have neurologic complications, you have cardiac complications, you have instability of movement and so on. And I will speak about that as well. Where are the clinics to take care of the long COVID patients? Everyone sees through the fact that this special payment by Prime Minister Rowley is a PR gimmick and cheap, blatant electioneering by his administration. Nobody expects that this special payment will materialize. So nobody is being fooled by your statement, Prime Minister Rowley, in your electioneering. The public response has proven this so far. In fact, I cut out a small Newsday article a few days ago. What do you think about the PM's offer of a bonus to health workers because of their work during the pandemic? And here the views, kind of late, as one. Another said he's playing for points to make up for all the filth he has done. It won't work except for his little clique that he has shown chicken feed for. This is published on Letters, today's question from the Newsday. Then some others said, that's wonderful. We all know it's wonderful to pay the healthcare workers, but that's not to say you'll have to vote for them again. Another said, election bribe, how much they think they are getting. Another said, well, it's well deserved. We all accept that. But there's always a political element where the PNM is concerned. Elections are due next year, so they have to start sweetening up their supporters. And the last one I want to read. I don't believe anything Rowley says. If and when the medical personnel receive this promised news, I will be happy, Prime Minister. Don't pay them 500 and defer their increases and back pay for the next election year. These are citizens of Trinidad and Tobago speaking on Prime Minister Rowley's recent statement. And immediately after that, the Express published a newspaper article on nursing body grateful for bonus, but calls for nurses to be made permanent. A whole 2/3 of a page on the Express, and a response by the president of the Nurses Association, Trinidad and Tobago Registered Nurses Association. So here is what President Edie Stewart said in response to the situation and the promise by the Prime Minister. He said he hopes that the government would make provisions to pay all outstanding money owed to them. All outstanding money. Millions are owed to the nurses. He hoped to make their temporary positions permanent. Over 3,000 nurses are in temporary positions, some having 6-month contracts, some having 1-month contract, no gratuity, no pensions whatsoever. He noted that this was not the first time such an offer was made by the government. He said to take note that this is not a new statement Prime Minister Rowley would have made. It is not a new statement. He made it already. In fact, he went on to show Prime Minister making that statement 5 times. He said he gave that assurance to the nursing personnel in 2020, just before the general elections, when he made promise to the association at a meeting at the Prime Minister's residence. 2020. He failed to keep this promise. This is what the President said, President of the Registered Nurses Association. He made the same statements in 2021. Edie Stewart is saying that. And earlier this year as well. And thus far, Rowley refused to honor his own promise 5 times. Now, I'm a medical doctor for over 48 years. God is good. And I'm concerned. I mean, what is happening to our Prime Minister? Is he forgetting that he made these promises and he keeps on making them once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times? God forbid. Am I detecting an element of this dementia stepping in? What is happening? You make a promise to fool the people in 2028 election. Oh God, try to honor your promise now. Bring something to reality. Suddenly you catch yourself again, or you remember that you had forgotten something before, and now you're repeating it again. My friend, Prime Minister Rowley, we know each other over 50 years. Prime Minister Rowley, check to see what is happening neurologically, because you can't be serious about making a promise 5 times and not keeping it. Mr. Stewart, the president of the Nurses Association, said they are currently going for outstanding increments, outstanding gratuity, and outstanding pension payments. He also said that finance minister in last year's budget gave those same assurances that nursing and ministry personnel would have been made permanently employed. 3,400 nurses are currently temporarily employed, and their contracts are renewed once per year without gratuity and without pensions. And recently, some of the nurses took the industrial court, went to the industrial court, and on July 29, 2022, the industrial court ruled against the Rowley government on this issue and mandated the government to correct that issue of temporary employment contracts without gratuity and pensions. As the government and the RHA sought to begin to implement these, and I'm sure we should be hearing much more about these. And I want to advise the 3,000 nurses who work so well and smart and dedicated and continue to save lives. You must not be trampled upon. You have to stand up for your rights. And your rights is not to get a 6-month contract or a 1-year contract. You must be given you must be given permanence in the Ministry of Health. This is what the government tried to do, the same PNM government tried to do in 1994 by moving all the public health sector workers under the Ministry of Health into regional health authorities. And the regional health authorities, where they had permanent contracts, the regional health authorities now only giving, they had permanence in the Ministry of Health, now they're only giving temporary contracts and so on. And this is what PNM is known for. They are known to destabilize and create hurt and pain to people of Trinidad and Tobago, to your own workers, your dedicated nurses who continue to save lives. How could somebody feel getting a 6-month contract and feel motivated to work? And they give off the best. They save lives. They work beyond the call of duty. I have worked in 18 hospitals around the world and trained in 4 universities. And I have seen our nurses work so beautifully and diligently and purposefully and caring for patients, whether it's a registered midwife, a registered nurse, a nursing assistant, and so on. They all gave up their lives, and many died from the COVID. About 12 or 13 nurses unfortunately died from the COVID. So there is a gross failure by the cabinet and the government to approve additional posts on the establishment in the health sector. There are 1,300 nursing vacancies existing still. Minister Diyal Singh, Prime Minister Rowley, Minister Imbert, what are you all doing about this? When your families don't go into the hospital, you go abroad. You send your families abroad. But when an ordinary citizen who is less financially able to pay for their health care, what happens to them? Because there are vacancies existing in the health service for both doctors, nurses, paraprofessionals. This country has never heard anything over the last 7 years about what the true establishment is as far as senior doctors, consultants, registrars, house officers, interns throughout Trinidad and Tobago. How much bed we have, how much bed utilized, how many nurses, registered nurses, how many nursing assistants, how many midwives, how many are trained in different fields of neurosurgery, intensive care unit, renal dialysis. Come tell the population, Minister Diyal Singh, you're sitting down there for 6 years, nearly 7 years, and you haven't had a grip on the health sector. You are floundering. You have failed the people. Bring out these facts. Tell the population where we are as far as the health sector is concerned. Let us have an understanding. But every day you want to come on and talk about this COVID sitting down, and I'll deal with that in a while. And even Public Service Association President Leroy Batiste described the move as long overdue, but questioned the timing and platform of the announcement. So that's all in keeping with the comments made about the announcement by Prime Minister Rowley. But I would want the Prime Minister to also quickly address in a meaningful way, that is the PSA President, the outstanding salaries negotiations on behalf of public officers, because, my God, that's long overdue. So that's why PMM is labeled promises never materialize, and it is fitting and apt. 46 years out of the 62 years they have governed this country, and they have governed it to the worst that they could. They have brought this country down, except for the 16 years that no other government, other than other governments like the NAR and Mr. Pandey government and Mrs. Bissessa's government, our PP government, we had only opportunity for 16 years out of the 62 years. So when you're celebrating 60 years, we appreciate the celebration. We as a people and a nation must celebrate. But you have destroyed this country. PNM has destroyed this country for these 46 years. And it took successive non-PNM governments to try and restore some degree of equilibrium and growth and development. But as soon as we get out of office, they reverse all the gains that we have made in this country during our government. And I can speak for it because I know what we did under Mrs. Bissessa government and the PP government in 2010 to 2015. They have reversed precipitously all the gains that we made in 2010 to 2015. And we have a thick booklet like this, members of the public, on the achievements of the United National Congress, Prime Minister Mrs. Bissessa's People's Partnership Government. And I urge all my colleagues, the younger ones who are coming up and developing, to memorize those achievements. And you must not fail to tell the population, this is what we did in 2010 to 2015, and this is what PNN has destroyed over the last 7 years. Corruption galore. People are dying and because of lack of health care. On the topic of compensation for COVID, which Prime Minister Rowley spoke about, what is he doing about compensating the hundreds of citizens who died in the intensive care unit from criminal negligence on the part of the 2x4 Minister of Health, Minister Diazig, and his disastrous team that had been advising them? What is happening? What compensation are you going to give to the families who have lost their loved ones? A mother, father, brother, sometimes 3 members of a family have died from COVID. You can imagine the distraught and the emotional pain that these families go through on a daily basis. How are they being compensated? Because of your criminal negligence. You did not put systems in place over a period of time. How are you going to compensate the nursing families, the 12 or 13 nurses who have died as a result of the COVID infection in the performance of the duty? And I believe about 2 or 3 doctors who have passed as well. The profession, and how are you going to compensate the paraprofessional workers who have also died from COVID? What is going to be done, Prime Minister, Minister Imbert and Minister Diazing, about the children in cases where both their parents have died as a result of COVID? I want you to look at the consideration of doing something for these children. How is going to compensate the many hundreds of families who were unable to perform final rites for their loved ones who passed away from COVID-19, and the trauma they would have suffered due to the state's bigoted stance, which had no basis in science? Is Rowley going to compensate these people for the emotional and mental trauma and for the additional expenses having to keep the bodies 2 to 3 weeks waiting for a determination by the government? Prime Minister Rowley, you have suffered a certain part of this population without any science, and you should be ashamed of what you did to a certain part of this population by not allowing them the freedom to pursue the funeral rites which they are legitimately expected to do for their mothers or fathers or for their families by cremation. And you prevented them for months. They had to go to court. The population must remember that. And they have to continue to speak about your bigoted stance on this matter without any science. We presented science for you to show that you can still cremate a body, but you didn't. And the patients, these families suffered. Are you going to compensate them? Are you going to compensate, Prime Minister Rowley, the families of the 19 patients who died at Point Fortin Hospital overnight due to a lack of oxygen in the Point Fortin Hospital. That is kept quiet. The country was not told about that. I know about it. 19 patients died overnight at Point Fortin Hospital because there was a confusion about the oxygen, and they died. They died because of the lack of oxygen in Point Fortin Hospital. Are you going to compensate these families? I want the families of those people who died. I can't remember the particular date, but you must investigate the night when 19 patients lost their lives at Point Fortin Hospital. And Trinidad and Tobago is again on the cusp of another deadly COVID-19 crisis. The fact that Prime Minister Rowley made this statement, even as we have been experiencing a dangerous rise in COVID-19 infections, hospitalizations, and deaths, yet he has blatantly refused to address the impending deadly crisis. All we are seeing so far is the same old, failed, useless measures being adopted by the Health Ministry, news conferences, with the Health Minister and the same old team telling the country about charts and bar charts, and beds occupied, graphs and graphs, and sadly, increasing COVID-19 death rates increasing. As I said, in June alone, there were 100. That formula has failed, Minister Dialsingh, Prime Minister Rowley. Sit down and wasting the population's time and wasting your time before you go and start to implement the recommendations of the Seamungal report. What are you wasting the people's time listening to your foolishness on a daily basis, or how many beds occupied, and how many charts and bar charts? It has proven to be a failure. We need tangible action. What is most disturbing and truly criminal about this, however, is that the Rowley government knows where it went wrong, and it knows what it must do to correct the wrongs and save citizens' lives. But they are blatantly refusing to do so. They're incompetent. They don't have the capacity and the capability to do anything. Resign, get out, let the people of this country decide what they want, and vote in a new government, which we know should be our government because of our performance, and let the people decide. It is evident in their refusal to implement the findings and recommendations of the Seamungal report. 19 recommendations were made, all of which none of these has been implemented. And this was laid in Parliament 6 months ago. So the ongoing ignoring and refusal by the Rowley government to treat with the findings of the Seamungal report that it had commissioned earlier this year. Let me remind you of these damning, frightening findings, because they want to bury it as usual. Nothing paid, no attention paid to the recommendations. The report points to criminal negligence as being the order of the day from Dialsingh and his cohorts, including and especially the NCRHA CEO, the unqualified carnival man who puts up stages. He might be reveling pretty shortly with Carnival. Davlin Thomas. I have to call his name because Davlin Thomas is responsible as the CEO for the Central Regional Health Authority, for Mount Hope Hospital, for Arima Hospital, and for Cora Hospital. And Davlin Thomas, you have been deliberately callous in your management of the COVID-19 pandemic issue for the blatant criminal negligence that has cost so many citizens their lives. Heads must roll. And I again appeal to the police commissioner, the deputy commissioner, Jacob. I want to appeal to you today. There has been criminal negligence in the deaths of patients during the COVID-19. You must set up a team to investigate what went wrong and how many people died needlessly and carelessly. That is a crime committed upon the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago. And you must take action as a responsible commissioner of police. And I ask the director of public prosecutions to work with the commissioner of police. People must be held accountable for the deaths of these people. You can't allow 4,100 citizens to die. When we were asking about the death rates in the intensive care unit, and they failed to give it because they knew what was going on. The Seamungal report showed that 95% of the patients who went into the ICU died. And they knew it, and they were hiding it deliberately. Are you all not ashamed of what you have done to this population? And you talk about now giving something to the healthcare workers. You have to compensate the 4,100 families. You must seek some introspection into what you did and begin to implement. And some details of the Seamongal report, I have it here. This is the Seamongal report, 105 pages with 18 recommendations on it. 19 recommendations on the Seamongal report, and it has all the contents. I studied this day in, day out, and I could understand what Professor Seamongal and his team would have experienced, because they said it in the report. They experienced difficulties in getting notes. Imagine 4,000 patients dying, and you could get only 30 notes to analyze. 30 notes deliberately kept from the committee. So it's a shame and a disgrace that Prime Minister Rowley was pressured by opposition leader Mrs. Bissessa to have a commission of inquiry. He appointed a Seamongal commission with 3 very distinguished, I think it was 4 distinguished colleagues and so on, who know their stuff. And I must compliment them for speaking the truth. They were not afraid to speak out the truth. And the truth is here. The truth is here. The 19 recommendations of the Seamongal report, none of which has been implemented. And I will go through very quickly with them. Data management system and data verification needed to be urgently linked to support cost-effective and oriented patient outcomes. The committee said they had tremendous difficulty in accessing data, particularly patients' records data. They got 30 records, and they had asked for 300, they get 30. A national survey of non-communicable diseases is urgently required, and the data used to guide the review and revision of health promotion and treatment programs because of the high rates of NCDs. NCDs, non-communicable diseases, diabetes, hypertension, cancer, some other lung problems, and so on. And up to now, the last census was done in 2011 under our administration. Now it's 2022. What national census is being contemplated? I asked the Ministry of Planning, is there anything on the way to do a national consensus so we can get the true incidence of diabetes and hypertension and cancer and so on? Where is the research from the Ministry of Health to give us the true pictures? What percentage of the population has diabetes? The last research project that we as doctors were in the health sector will remember the St. James study, where they found that 40% of the population in the African population had hypertension above age 40, and 40% of the East Indian population above age 40 had diabetes. Professor Tilak Singh and his team, who the avant-garde of diabetes, and many other colleagues in management of hypertension and so on, have to guess to see what's the real incidence. But under Mrs. Bissessa's government, we ensured that the 105 health centers, most of them were opened up to 9 p.m. and on weekends and public holidays, so that patients with diabetes and hypertension could go and have their blood pressure and their diabetic situation checked and treated and managed properly, because we had doctors there, we had nurses there, we had the pharmacies working. But you close it down. That's when I speak about swift and precipitous reversal of all the gains that you made. You close down the health centers, you're back to 4 o'clock. Patients, they can't even get the drugs and the pharmaceuticals for their NCDs. But don't ask for cancer. The patients with cancer have been dying from lack of chemotherapeutic agents to get the chemotherapy. They can't even get the radiation. Some of them couldn't even have the breast lumps biopsy to know what type of cancer it was. They can't get the CT scans to say what stage of the cancer is, whether it's in the abdomen, whether it's in the lung, whether it's in the brain. My God. Well, we had the incidence of cancers about 3,000 cancer patients per year, but 50% could be saved if you do the correct things. Whether it's surgery and chemotherapy, whether it's surgery, chemotherapy, and radiotherapy, patients could be saved. But when they're not getting the surgery, when they're not getting the chemotherapeutic drugs, when they're not getting radiotherapy, these patients are dying. it crawls my blood. I feel so sad that in a country that has so much money available because of the gross incompetence of Prime Minister Rowley's government and previous PNM governments, they have plunged this country into darkness because of the mismanagement in the health sector. And it's sad that patients have to die because they did not get the treatment. And families cry. I cry with them. So, ladies and gentlemen, the issue of the Seamongal report, 19 areas there, and no reprieve. You remember when the COVID started, we raised the issues of protective equipment and face masks and face shields. These were deficient. Medical personnel were not getting proper protection and resulting in contracting the virus and causing death. All this happened before they started to do anything. You would remember us raising the motion on the 30th of January 2020, 3 months after it started to occur in China. They didn't take us on. They said, then when it came on March 24th, when they had to close down everything, they said, we are ready. And never ready. Medical personnel not getting proper protection and resulting in contracting the virus, causing death. Medical personnel had to deal with a vast amount of COVID cases, exhausting them and putting their life at risk. Young doctors work without any proper supervision. Consulting doctors were not on site because some were removed and sent to other hospitals, whereas they needed their support at Couva Hospital. And others were threatened to stay quiet and silent or else they will lose their contract for 1 year. Most of them, the young doctors were on contract for 6 months, 3 months, 1 month. Young doctors had to find their own way and contracted the virus and living with COVID symptoms now. There are many nurses who died as a result of the infection. They had insufficient testing apparatus in the public health sector, and there was none available in the public sector. And they refused to allow the private sector to do the testing eventually. Who does all the testing in Trinidad now? Is the private sector. So this government does not know what they're doing. 1 minute they say no private sector, and next minute the private sector has to help them. There were insufficient nursing and medical personnel to look after the patients. Some doctors who were doing a great job with the COVID in the ICU at Couva were removed. We were asking the mortality of the intensive care unit, and they were denied. So why was the Prime Minister late in attaining vaccines when other countries were getting the vaccines? He said he didn't want to beg for vaccines. Patients died while waiting for vaccines. He promoted that vaccine would come from the African Union. Some came, but came late. Total incompetence. And as I mentioned, they run out of the oxygen in the Couva Hospital. So there were a lot of junior doctors managing the intensive care unit, which required more senior doctors. So as a result, some of the deaths occurred because some of these the personnel. You had one nurse looking after 6 patients, or 4 to 6 patients in intensive care, when the gold standard is 1 nurse to 1 patient and 1 doctor to 2 patients. But that wasn't there. And the reports speak about guidelines of nursing ratios and so on, and psychological pressure on the nurses. Healthcare Committee finds the need for national policy in ICU admissions and more. The report said it was remarkable given the high death rates amongst the elderly. It was also noted that there was special pediatric. So there was no admission. People over age 80, citizens, were denied ICU beds. So these are just some of the issues, ladies and gentlemen. There's much more to speak about, but I don't want to occupy your time. Last thing, where out of the patients who are dying now, you say that 80% are not vaccinated. What have you done with trying to continue to stimulate their minds and their thoughts and to bring them to vaccination? But now, if you even want to bring them for vaccination, you don't have the Pfizer and you don't have the AstraZeneca. I believe you only have Sinopharm and Johnson & Johnson. People are reluctant, and so they're not coming forward. Are you going to get back some other vaccines? And those who, we have nearly about 500,000 people still on, but because 8 out of the 10 people from your statistics, which could be bogus at times, you say that 8 out of these 10 are unvaccinated. So because they're unvaccinated, you're allowing them to die. You're allowing the unvaccinated patients to die. We spoke about the need for the tocilizumab drug, remdesivir. And I remember my younger junior colleague, a member of parliament for Carinese, who succeeded me in Carinese, Dr. Rishi Sicharan, a dental surgeon by profession. He asked months ago about Paxlovid. You would see that President Biden and even the world famous Professor Fauci, when they got COVID, they took Paxlovid. Where is Paxlovid available? Minister Diaz Singh, you said that you were going to get Paxlovid in this country. So people are dying without the tocilizumab, without the remdesivir, without the Regeneron, and their lives are just going and you have done nothing. So it is a shame and a disgrace about the mismanagement that continues. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that at present, as we are on the cusp of another deadly COVID-19 crisis, the world has moved on from lockdowns. The Rowley government must now find new ways to deal with and treat the impending destructive COVID-19 crisis. Yet they show no intentions of doing so. The Rowley government has failed to address issues raised by its own committee to address the major shortcomings in the past 2 years regarding his government's mishandling of the issue. We demand answers. The population demand answers. As an alternate government, Mrs. Prasad Bises's opposition and we in the opposition demand answers from you, Prime Minister Rowley. You must not shirk your responsibility. You have failed and you're continuing to fail. We want answers to these questions, not the same old useless, tired formula of the failed minister and his failed team sitting in a news conference every day. Lives are being lost daily once more from COVID. What is the plan? And in the hospitals, it's like killing fields. Families send their families inside the hospital, relatively sick, but come out dead in the end. Why? Why that must be allowed to continue? And everybody who in a position to get external treatment and go to some other hospital abroad going, but our people dying in this country. What is the plan? We demand answers. We demand urgent strategic intervention. In fact, Mrs. Prasad Bisesa in June 2021 specifically called for a commission of inquiry into the overall management of the COVID-19 vaccine pandemic. And I call for a confidential inquiry into every death occurring from the COVID. So we reiterate that call today. And I say to the Rowley government, if you know you cannot protect or manage the COVID-19 crisis or the health sector to prevent loss of lives or the country as a whole, then do the citizens a favor and resign. Shut down this useless, dangerous, corrupt, incompetent government and call the elections now. People are fed up. They want a new government. They want a new prime minister. They want a new team of people to manage this country. Give the people of Trinidad and Tobago a fighting chance to survive. And the last point I want to show here is that I picked up this on recently, where Trinis are skipping meals. They're selling assets to survive. This is the state of this country. The World Food Survey finds startling fallout of pandemic. Trinis skip meals, sell assets to survive. The survey polled over 1,500 people over 3 weeks from January to February 2022 and found that food consumption had declined in Trinidad and Tobago as citizens continue to struggle from the economic fallout of the pandemic. Food consumption and diets of people in Trinidad and Tobago continue to be impacted by the pandemic, with 30% of respondents skipping meals or eating less than usual, 29% eating less preferred foods, and 5% going on an entire day without eating in the week leading up to the survey. 5%. So, ladies and gentlemen, members of the audience, these are just some of the issues that we can speak to you about in this half an hour, 35 minutes. There are many more issues we will continue to speak. We are here to protect you. We are here to look after your interests. The opposition is the alternate government. we will speak out loudly against the total mismanagement and incompetence and the criminal negligence by Prime Minister Rowley and his government. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gopeesingh, for a very comprehensive analysis of the health sector and the consequential failings of this Rowley administration. This leads me into what I am here to discuss with respect to the education sector. And what we can see as a constant across the government is that it's not a question of there being a resource problem. It's a question of there being a competence problem. So the resources are available. The problems, we know them, we are aware, they can be assessed and solutions can be provided. But what we have in place right now is a government that is not competent enough to solve the problems facing the nation. And so we are here today, just about a week before our students go back to physical school. We are here in the context of a country that has faced some of the strictest lockdown measures during the pandemic, a country where we face the strictest lockdown measures, and from the analysis given by Dr. Gopeesingh today, did not really yield any major benefits for the citizens of this country. But the sector that saw the greatest fallout, or perhaps the most significant fallout for future generations, is the education sector. When we take a critical look at what has happened in the education sector over the past 2 years, we can really say that this government has failed the future generations of Trinidadians and Tobagonians. And so I want to start by a call back to the last press conference that I was here at, where we discussed the Vacation Revision Program. The Vacation Revision Program was conceived and conceptualized based on the failings and the incompetence of the Ministry of Education, given that they were unable to account for the over 40,000 students who never accessed online learning. That number does not include those who may have accessed a few times but did not consistently access an education over the pandemic years, 2021 in particular. And so we saw the worst SCA results this country has seen in decades. Now, this would have been as part of a sliding scale since this government came into power in 2015. But in 2022, we had significant numbers of students, over 30% of students, not scoring the mark to access a secondary education. And so the ministry conceptualized this Vacation Revision Program, which cost taxpayers $10 million as the estimated amount. We await from the ministry, who seems to have also taken a July-August vacation. So when schools close, they also seem to close their accountability feature. But we are looking at a program that was meant to last 4 weeks, that from the onset we knew was largely undersubscribed. So they were supposed to cater to the 9,000 students who never made the passing grade to enter secondary school next week. And what we've had from the ministry, absolute silence. On the onset of the program, I stated the United National Congress welcomes any key targeted intervention to assist our students who were unable to access online learning, who were unable to access quality education over the pandemic years. That being said, we had called for certain things, rigorous monitoring and evaluation of the programs. It is not sufficient to announce a program, to host a program, and then not tell the population whether or not the key deliverables of the program have been met. Are these students, firstly, how many students attended? Anecdotal evidence tells us, conversations with teachers right now tell us that this program remained undersubscribed. The initial numbers were that 30%, we had 30% enrollment. What was the sustained participation and activity? The ministry must tell us. They must have kept accurate records. We would hope they have been abysmal with the data collection and equally abysmal with reporting to the key stakeholders and the population at large as to what is taking place in our education sector. But beyond that, what was the sustained attendance at these vacation revision programs? I had called before the program started for us to set clear deliverables. What are we looking for? How are you assessing whether or not these students have attained the key competencies to be successful at secondary school. If you are not doing that, if the program did not accomplish that, if the program was essentially 4 weeks of a vacation camp, if it were, then what have we done? Have we accomplished anything, or are we kicking the can down later on? What we are seeing as a population, again, is the inability of a government to plan and execute targeted interventions to the problems facing our sector. So as I look on at the vacation revision program and the silence ensuing from the Ministry of Education, the Minister of Education has a duty, a duty in law and a duty in as a member of the executive to report to the population whether or not our education policies are succeeding. We've seen from the results that we are in a very abysmal state, but we are also seeing that the interventions are not really intended to achieve its purpose. It's really intended to mama guide the nation. We heard from Dr. Gopeesingh this constant rhetoric and useless announcements without meeting targeted interventions. And who suffers? The population. And in this case, our children are suffering. And so when we discuss now, I've seen an article talking about devices, that they've delivered some devices which would be going out to students who are completed the means test and are requiring of these devices. And so that brings us again to a key point that Dr. Gopeesingh raised, which is that government came in very swiftly in 2015 to dismantle programs that were proven to be working. We saw the dismantling of programs that allowed extreme success in the SEA classes to have a sliding scale of SEA success since 2015. We saw the complete dismantling of the laptop program, which really was a key component in the crisis that we faced from 2020 and ongoing. But now they made an announcement that they will be distributing devices. And I just want to use one opportunity here to point out the latent hypocrisy of this PNM administration, that you can make an announcement now that you're returning to physical schools. There's been no discussion of how you will incorporate the lessons learned, if indeed the ministry learned any lessons over the past 2 years, on how to incorporate technology in schools and the importance of incorporating technology in schools. But you're delivering these devices. You would recall, I know Dr. Gopeesingh is well aware of the criticisms that they put forward, that we gave out laptops without the enabling technology. This administration had 2 years of online learning to put in place in schools the infrastructure that is necessary for technology to be incorporated as a significant part of the curriculum of the education sector of Trinidad and Tobago. And they've wasted it. They have absolutely wasted it. And we are seeing now that with the reopening of school, that we want to pretend the last 2 years did not exist. So absolutely no lessons have been learned. So when I say there's hypocrisy, I'm saying now you are acknowledging that devices are required, but you are not acknowledging that you have not used the space to be able to effectively and efficiently incorporate technology into our curriculum. And so I will state, we do not have a resource problem in Trinidad and Tobago. We have a competence problem at the very head. They are unable to create solutions to the problems facing this country. And so as we go into the new school term, and you want to talk about coming into physical spaces, the fact of the matter is, over the last 2 years, with the infrastructural decay that has faced our physical schools, the government has done nothing to treat with that. And so, just as with the vacation revision program, we will remain diligent. We would be looking on at the reopening of schools. I know within my constituency, schools have not received the necessary allocation or the releases to allow the physical space to be prepared for students as they come back out in a week's time. And so, as we take a holistic look at the education sector, I want to reiterate and support the call of the leader of the opposition a truly humanitarian call, and I believe that every right thinking citizen of this country would understand the need for us to take a significant look at the education of children of migrants or migrant children within spaces of Trinidad and Tobago. And I want to make it very clear, no matter what excuse the government comes to give you about what they have and they don't have and how are you going to do it, Trinidad and Tobago is not facing a resource problem. The Ministry of Education remains within the top 5 ministries getting billion-dollar allocations every single budget. We are coming into a budget, we expect to see a billion-dollar allocation. What the heads of those divisions do with that money, and this is in the ministries, the Minister of Education, how you prioritize, how you maximize the piece of the pie that you are given is where we will see whether or not you can make the grade. Dr. Gopeesingh, being a former Minister of Education, would have maximized the allocation, which saw Trinidad and Tobago achieving record level successes at CSEC, CAPE, and SEA. With the same amount of money, we have seen disaster under 2 ministers of education, the former and the present. And so, with respect to the migrants, these children of migrants, migrant children, and their space within our education sector, we would all recall that Dr. Rowley and his administration created a space for the registration of Venezuelans within Trinidad and Tobago. The registration process, we ask certain key questions, just as we did with the vacation revision program, just as we've done with all key policy decisions. We've asked pertinent questions that got no answers, which is what comes next. Okay, so you have been registered. What comes next? They have left the space of children of migrants who are either born here or who came here silent. But the issue exists within Trinidad and Tobago as it stands. And so if you pretend it does not exist, what happens a few years down the road? The same thing with SEA, it is the same thing with CSEC, it is the same thing with school violence. Pretending a problem does not exist, or worse yet, consistently giving us cosmetic responses to serious problems really is worse than just putting a plaster on a gaping wound. It is worse than that. So what we have now, we have the issue of an undocumented number of persons within the country. That is a fact. They cannot deny. The last registration, they told us 16,000. If you are living in Trinidad, if you are living in Trinidad, you are very well aware that number is not a serious number. There is no constant monitoring and evaluation of the number of children here. You are dependent. The government has ceded its responsibility to NGOs without even giving them the time of day to find out what they may need, what assistance they may need. And so you've left children who are now in Trinidad, who are in Trinidad and Tobago, without an education, and then you are going to have to treat with that problem in the future. And that is the modus operandi of the PNM. They pretend these problems don't exist, and they leave it for another administration to try to fix within 5 years. And then they come back and they say they have the solutions. But again, that we reiterate over and over, the PNM cannot have the solution because they are in fact the problem. And so we, as the opposition, will continue to raise key elements as we go back to school, key elements in the health sector. The fact is, in Trinidad and Tobago, all of our key sectors are failing. The collapse of our key sectors are as a result of poor policy making, poor policy execution. And so therefore, you cannot put the problem in to solve the problem. So, as I conclude here today and we open up to questions from the media, I would reiterate, as we prepare for the reopening of school, a lot of questions remain unanswered, whether or not students going into certain forms are indeed prepared. A lot of questions remain unanswered as to whether or not the ministry has conceived any which way about thinking about the 47,000 students who never accessed online education, whether they have utilized the time to disaggregate that into standards and forms, whether or not you even know if they are coming back into school. If as the article stated, people are skipping meals to survive. Do you think that they are able to buy school uniforms and school books and get their children back out to school? Is there any collaborative effort between the Ministries of Social Development and the Ministry of Education and indeed the Ministry of Health to state whether or not you are even aware of the magnitude of the crisis that is facing this country? And so, as I open up to questions, I say again, members of the public, you have come to us time and time again with your complaints, with the issues that you are facing, with the constant hardship that you are facing. It is time to take that issue and be much more vocal about it. You are taxpayers, you are citizens of this country, you have a right for your voice to be heard. And I mean, there is no need to cower in the face of this PNM administration. It is time for you to stand tall and stand up. Our voices must be heard. So thank you very much. We will take any questions now.
We have some questions coming in.
Mm-hmm.
It begins
Yes.
with regards to the education revision program. So you're saying that there is no metric by which we can measure if it has been successful. Could you see that?
Absolutely. So you would recall at the beginning of the program, we asked that metric to be made available so that you can, I mean, the private sector does it all the time. How are you measuring key targets? We asked whether there would be a test at the end, which would not have made sense because each student is coming in having not passed the exam on different states, whether it's a math problem, English composition problem, English comprehension problem. So how were you disaggregating students and getting some kind of targeted help? Silence from the ministry. All we heard was the program was going to be available, it was going to be close to you, and attend if you will. Nothing else. So there was no metric to measure. There has been no discussion since as to whether or not these students are now able to be successful at a secondary school education. And the ministry, like I said, has remained silent over the July-August vacation because apparently if school is closed, the ministry is also closed.
Dr. Gopeesingh, what precipitated the Simone report was the fact that TNT had a rather high, in fact, amongst the highest COVID death rates in the world per capita. Now, we know this has been a few months after. Has there been any indication so far as to what may have contributed to that?
We stood when they were boasting that Trinidad is number one based on a study by some medical student at Oxford University. And they pick out that one student, we're number one. We became the number one country in the world, in fact, of deaths per million population. Very sad. And that continued for a long time. And we're now, well, of course, we were the highest in the Caribbean. Imagine Jamaica had less COVID infections than Trinidad and Tobago, and they're twice our population. So that speaks about it's as a result of the gross incompetence, the incapacity to fulfill the requirements for management, the mismanagement, and the criminal negligence that caused the team of the support team that the government had relying on to give the necessary help and assistance in terms of policies and practices and procedures for the management of these patients were never put into place. And I could name about 100 issues where this government and the Ministry of Health failed to implement properly. At one time, I sent a little note about 10:45 in the morning to Prime Minister Rowley through his WhatsApp. I said, Prime Minister, what are you doing about the 6,500 citizens at home who are getting the infection and no medication is being given to them and nothing is being done for them, and they becoming precipitously ill, decreased oxygenation, rushing for ambulance service, and dying on the way to a hospital or in the emergency tent. And that's when Prime Minister Rowley said he blocked one of his friends. I mean, that was the question that I put to my friend Prime Minister Rowley. He's still my friend, but we're on opposite sides politically. But this is a situation that we were governed with during that time, and we back on another role, and you see them again as though it's a mass with graphs here, deaths there, beds there, same old foolishness taking place on the national debt. They can't lift their thinking beyond that. What about, as I mentioned, the 19 recommendations of the Simongal report? You give them 1 week, then you say, all right, take 3 weeks. It's 6 months now they made the recommendations and nothing has been implemented. Oh my God. Sad, very sad.
Ms. Haynes, you mentioned the fact that the opposition leader has called for migrant school children to gain access to primary and secondary school. Do you have any data on exactly how much children does that entail?
You see, the issue with asking members of the opposition for data when the remit of the government is to provide that data. And I mean, it is a callback to all of the things we've been discussing with respect to health. Dr. Gopeesingh, you recall in 2020, we were asking for accurate data in terms of the testing, etc.
That's right.
When the registration program was rolling out for Venezuelans, we asked for accurate data collection and they kept insisting the numbers were 16,000. So to answer your question, no, we don't have any kind of numbers, but we do know it is a significant number of persons who've entered our country. Whether or not they are registered, they are in Trinidad and Tobago. But what I want to make clear here is that this problem was not something that it's not something that they could not foresee. When they announced the registration program, the onus was on the government at the time, and it still is now, to lay out exactly what that means, what it meant for children, what it meant for workers, what it meant for the longevity of your stay, whether, and these things, again, they left out, they never treated with. And so you have the opposition leader calling on the government now to address something that they were supposed to address 2 years ago. Calling.
5 years.
Correct,
Yeah.
correct.
5
And
years.
so that the children are here. You know that children are required to have access to education. You know that Trinidad and Tobago has a responsibility at this point to these children who are within our borders. And yet still you will not address the issue. And they will not, it goes further beyond that. It's not that they won't address the issue. They won't even be truthful about the numbers. They won't even give us data so that we have the clear idea of the magnitude of the issues facing our country. So the leader of the opposition is absolutely right. Trinidad and Tobago, we had a registration program that this government touted that would be a solution to our migrant issues, and then they left it with nothing else. No enabling legislation, no enabling policy, no further reporting on what it has done, no further reporting on the numbers coming into Trinidad and Tobago, and certainly no numbers in terms of the children who are here and whether or not they would be accessing any type of education.
May I be permitted to piggyback on that issue of statistics and data? I would categorically state that the Central Statistical Office has fallen dead. We were pillarized in the last year, 2014, 2015, for not being able to find accommodation for the various units of the CSO, and Imbert and a few of them tried to make mass out of it. For 7 years now, the Central Statistical Office has been unable to publish critical information. We used to have a booklet, a small booklet, with all critical data for years and years from the Central Statistical Office. That no longer exists. I personally asked the deputy head of the Central Statistical Office to give me data for deaths and the annual deaths in the population and the causation of the deaths, whether diabetes, hypertension, strokes, heart disease, heart attacks, cancer. He said, Dr. Gopeesingh, I'll have to begin to search for that. And after about a month, I was able to get some minimal information about 1 year, 1 year, which is about 4 or 5 years back. But this country has no information. Well, I can speak on the health now, and MP for Tabaquite, who's a brilliant young MP, she has raised the issue of the lack of statistics and information in education. And I also want to condemn this government Ministry of Planning, who has the responsibility for providing the data. And that is why you have the collusion and not the collusion of the central bank cooking up their own figures, and which Imbert speaks about, and he will bring that into the budget debate pretty shortly. Cooked up figures, which he is getting from cooked up figures by the central bank, without strong scientific data by the Central Statistical Office. So it's woeful. 11 years now. The last census was done, and the CSO can't provide anything, any data whatsoever. And that was, you remember, they wanted to merge the CSO with the Board of Inland Revenue, and they tried for years to force us down to bring down that particular body to merge both of them together. But one doesn't even exist. The CSO doesn't even exist now.
Ms. Haynes,
Yes.
it's been a few weeks since the Prime Minister has outlined his plans to treat crime as a public health crisis. We haven't heard the details of the policy as yet, but do you believe that school violence should also be included as part of this public health crisis?
By my nature, I'm an optimistic person, but I can tell you I have no confidence that we would ever hear about that plan for crime to be treated as a public health policy. Do I think school violence should be treated within this space? Absolutely. I think that I've always advocated, the UNC has always advocated for a holistic approach to our education sector. This includes thinking about the mental health of our students, thinking about how you incorporate emotional intelligence, developmental capabilities within the curriculum. We have, if they had built on the programs that they met in 2015, we would not be facing these problems. Instead, they have systematically cut down on a number of the student support services, the guidance counselors within the schools, things like that. And so, no, I don't believe we'll hear anything more from the Prime Minister. If there indeed were a collaborative approach or the whole of government approach that they speak about but they never act on, we would have been seeing very clearly targeted interventions based on data coming from the Ministry of Social Services, and that being impacted within the schools, because we are constantly treating a symptom and we are never treating the cause of the problem. And so we will continue to have the issue. With respect to crime as a public health crisis, the issues that I'm raising now under achievement, the inability of students to access or even be part of an equitable education system, the migrant children being left out of the system, all of these things will then form its way and become part and parcel of how we are treating with violence within the society, certainly violence within the school system. Again, not what Trinidad is saying is not a an issue where Prime Minister will make an announcement and leave it hanging, because he's going to come to make a series of announcements in the budget while we discuss the budget. They are all going to come to make a series of announcements and promises, and we'll never hear anything from it again.
Minister Decoto, God bless his soul, he is passed. He had formulated a 15-point agenda for implementation, and which he worked with over the last 3 years of our administration in reducing school violence. School violence is nothing new, but we had to tackle it. And there were papers from since 1985 speaking about what measures we're going to take. And Minister Decoto, with my assistance at times, was able to implement most of the 15 recommendations, like body scanners, hand scanners, parenting and education program. You're quite aware of that, Anita. And so all were there for them to continue, which they discontinued. And you spoke about the reduction of the School Support Services Division from 700. Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa made sure when she came into government, she said increase back the Student Support Services Division to 700 guidance counselors, guidance officers, school psychiatrists, behavioral psychologists, clinical psychologists. They were all there. Yeah. But they disbanded everything.
Correct. And this also goes to the issue of making policy decisions without the data. So if you are not following a data-driven policy making, you are never going to meet with success. So you are making policies in a vacuum by VAPs. If you wake up in the morning, you don't want a laptop program, you cancel it. You wake up, you don't want health centers open for extended hours in rural communities, you cancel that. But the data tells you, the data supported these programs. They supported the efficacy and effectiveness of these programs. And the absence of data means there's an absence of data-driven policy making, which means that you are going to see sector by sector collapse because there's nothing holding it up.
Last question, Dr. Gopeesingh. We heard that the Minister has said that the government has spent about $4 billion in COVID relief. He's suggesting now that that figure might actually be about 18 billion. Based on your experience, is there any real or is there any other estimate on exactly how much has been spent in the healthcare sector to tackle COVID?
Thank you for asking that question from who asked that. We have not been able to determine scientifically and statistic-wise how much money was actually spent on the COVID pandemic. One had been saying 5.1 billion, another said, I think it was 19 billion. So this is another, we asked for, before this budget is read, the Minister of Finance must determine and initiate a thorough introspection of the expenditure during the COVID, where it was spent, how much was spent for vaccines, but that in itself, everything is a secret as to how much, what you call it, under a special treaty where non-disclosure.
Right.
So how much was obtained from the international organizations for the country to be assisted with COVID? How much was spent on purchasing drugs? How much was pharmaceutical supplies? How much was given to the regional health authorities? And then the other aspects, the social aspect about unemployment and homes and so on. How much was actually spent and where was it spent? Now, that was another PNM slush fund. That was a PNM slush fund, the expenditure on the COVID. And those who were able to mastermind the data and to effect transfer of funds to citizens, there's always questions to be asked. There are always questions to be asked. And so we're asking now, Prime Minister Rowley, Minister Imbert, please tell the population how much you borrowed, because you had the ability to borrow over $20 billion when the last debate in Parliament, I remember specifically in 2020, you were able to receive the approval of Parliament to borrow $20 billion. How much have you borrowed? How much you got from the international organizations? And how much was spent on different aspects of the COVID, and whether it's the social aspect or the health aspect? You have to tell this population, because we cannot live with this hanging over our head. Well, you spend X amount and Y amount. Tell us the facts and back up the facts. Back up your statements that you make, because as far as I'm concerned, you continue to fool the population, Minister Imbert. You are a person who cook up figures. You're well known for cooking up figures, and you come with your own figures at every particular time to suit yourself, but you can't fool the population. So come with the truth. Tell the population where it is. If you have to spend an hour delineating where your expenses have been, the population must be satisfied that this is money well spent. So you don't have 30% of our population having to skip a meal, 30%, and 5% have to skip a day of meal. So 1 out of every 20 citizens have to skip a day not to eat. That is what he and his government have brought this country to. They said they spent 5 billion, tell us. You spend 19 billion, which is right, tell us. So we demand that expenditure issue must be told to the population.
Okay. That's all questions we have.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you again for joining us as we discuss critical issues of national importance. The United National Congress remains a very diligent opposition, and you can join us tomorrow, Monday, on all of our online channels for the virtual reports where you will hear the leader of the opposition again treat with critical issues of the failings of this government. So thank you for joining us and have a productive week ahead.
Thank you.